Welcome. Hi, I'm Mikki, and this is Mikkipedia, where I sit down and chat to doctors, professors, athletes, practitioners, and experts in their fields related to health, nutrition, fitness, and well-being. And I'm delighted that you're here. Morning everyone, hope you're having a fabulous week. It is Wednesday already, if you're catching this on the Wednesday. And of course, daylight savings for us here in New Zealand, which even though we only skip an hour, always feels like about 3 hours, that kind of jet lag feeling. But anyway, today on the show, I'm so excited to bring to you my conversation that I have with one of my besties, Dr Karen Faisandier, all about stress, chronic stress, languishing, and the endurance phase of stress. Now, Karen is a clinical psychologist. She is based down in Wellington, and she's an integrative mental health practitioner. And she is actually the founder of the practice, the Integrative Practice, which is a holistic psychology service in Wellington, New Zealand. Karen and I spend our time talking about the negative impact of chronic stress, this whole concept of sort of languishing, and how she helps people cope in times of stress. And it's using obviously techniques that she's learnt through her practice as a doctor of clinical psychology, but also because Karen is holistic, she takes a much broader view of health and puts into place a lot of the things that we talk about in Mikkipedia with other guests related to lifestyle, diet, exercise, and a whole host of things. Karen's innovative approach integrates those psychological aspects, nutritional and lifestyle strategies into a practical recovery framework for adults experiencing mental health concerns resulting from chronic stress, anxiety, and overwhelm. And we talk about them in today's show. Now, Karen has also released an upcoming online course called Project Revive, which offers an integrative journey for a calm, energized, and connected life. So this is a 6-week program, and it provides a step-by-step supported approach to help arm you with an abundance of practical tools and techniques to promote long-term psychological well-being. And a lot of what Karen and I talk about today is based in that space. And you can find out more about Project Revive, because it is now live on her website at theintegrativepractice.com, where you can also find more information about Karen and her background. And just a little bit more information on Karen. She has completed postgraduate modules with the Australasian College of Nutritional and Environmental Medicine and is currently furthering her study in clinical nutrition. And she's got a wealth of information on her blog as well. So this is such a great resource, people. So if you've got any interest, queries, or concerns in and around this area, I highly recommend that you check out theintegrativepractice.com. And without further delay, please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Karen Faisandier. Dr. Karen Faisandier, did I say that right?
You nailed it.
Fantastic. I've never said your last name out loud. I think that's what it is. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Yes, I'm here in Wellington and it's windy.
That almost like people, when you see people post about Wellington on a good day, you just know it's a little bit like a hashtag done a stunner, like things like that seem not to happen that often. So when they do, we want to shout about it.
Absolutely, in Wellington you do.
Yeah. Now, how is life in level 2?
Life is feeling different again. All the levels seem to feel like they've got their thing, don't they? Like level 4 just feels very restrictive. Level 3 feels like just a little bit more freedom, like psychologically. And then level 2 is sort of, for me, it's almost like the least preferred of the levels, because it's not normal, but you're kind of going about your business a bit more, but there's just so many things you've got to think about the whole time. Yeah. What about you? You're still level 4?
Still level 4, and I'm gunning for a change to level 3 on Tuesday. So fingers crossed that that happens. But feeling super interesting to note how I feel this time around compared to all the other times, like I came across a word yesterday called languishing, and it was a New York Times article written by Adam Grant, and he used that term to refer to that sort of underlying, not depressed, not anxious, just not excited feeling that we've all sort of got in and around how life is going to be moving forward. And this article, I think, might have been written in November 2020, and it was referring to how we're all going to feel about 2021. And I'm reading this article and I'm thinking that's so pinpoints exactly how I'm sort of feeling right now, basically just a little bit below my usual level, if you like.
Yeah.
Like, it's fine. And actually, we are so much luckier than so many other people, and I'm 100% know that. But yeah.
I call that a bit meh.
Yeah, that would be the other apt description of it, right? Yeah.
Well, there's been so many changes, right? It's all the little things that add up to be everything.
Yeah, completely. And as you say, there's as you move through the levels, I agree with you. Level 2 is my least preferred level, for the fact that it's almost like you are pretending to do what you normally do, but it's in such abnormal kind of conditions and restrictions, and that it's not there's nothing like going out, for example, is actually not that fun because you are so social distant. So you're in this environment where you would normally socially interact with a whole bunch of people, and then suddenly you have to all be sitting apart. You've got masks. You can't go up to the bar to get your drink. They have to come to you. Like just almost every part of that process is yet another reminder that life isn't normal, and you're just not sure when it'll be normal, if you like.
Yeah, and being wired for connection, that just takes a big toll, right? Like all day long for people. Having those type of social exchanges where people, you can't even see their mouths to see if they're smiling at you properly.
Karen, what has been your experience with, I guess, not just your clients, but people around you with how they've coped with lockdown, with the last 18 months? And I'm aware that Wellington is different from Auckland. It's been less sort of prone to just having these snap lockdowns, but you guys have had it as well. What is your sort of professional sort of opinion on how people have been coping?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with what you were saying about the second time round, or it's probably third time for you. I think you had sort of another one in between up in Auckland, but the first one had novelty, so it was all new, even though it was also uncertain and anxiety-provoking for many and put a lot of stress on people. There was also the novelty factor of sort of like, what is this? And, lots of people on the one hand reported a really positive experience of stopping, slowing down, cooking at home, spending time with people, but it depended so much on your home situation, other factors, what your relationships were like, what your financial situation was like, other stresses, family further afield that you could no longer see or overseas. This time round, that novelty factor hasn't been there, I think, for people. So, I mean, my personal experience for the first probably 2 or 3 days was kind of like, oh, yay, like I'm stopping again, and I don't have to do anything right now, apart from, of course, all the things that you do have to do when you run a business and keep things going. But then it quite quickly wore off, and I think it's, for me, it was like, the novelty factor wasn't there, and not knowing, we didn't sort of know this time that there was a clear time frame. Because of the way it had to be done this time, sort of in a piecemeal, kind of like, right, the next 3 days are like this. We're going to review it in 3 days. Okay, right, we're doing this for another 3 days. It sort of wasn't, sort of like, we're doing this for 2 weeks, and
Yeah.
So, you didn't really know kind of what you were responding to. this time. I think the Delta strains put a lot more fear out there for people,
Mm.
a lot more worry about the level of, possible contagion and things. So for some people, I think there's a bit more worry just with the name and the fear that's kind of come with that particular name.
Yeah. And so I want to ask you from your, with your professional sort of hat on, what's your opinion on how, actually, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but I'm really interested to know, like, what's your opinion on how we as a population are being sort of told the information? So obviously the Herald, for example, they'll always have the breaking news, and they'll have the live sort of updates at 1:00, and they have the vaccine rollout going across the sort of the top of the screen. But I guess from like the signs in and around Delta, the jingle that we hear every time they talk about COVID, and that woman's voice is now just kind of almost burnt into my brain, what she's saying. Like, do you have any opinions on, like, professional opinions on the tactics that are used to sort of relay information to us?
Yeah, well, I think I could answer that by kind of zooming out and looking at, news and information that we receive more broadly. I definitely don't want to bag the media, because I think they've got a really tough job these days to get, their information out. And it has changed over time massively. But if you zoom out, we weren't designed for the sort of 24/7 updated, latest risk and threat kind of information constantly being bombarded at us. And, because we now have, I guess it's on our phone, it's on our computer, it's on our TVs, it's hard to get away from, particularly when you're under stress, and that kind of tendency to get control and seek information and check, those sort of checking behaviours are happening, which just perpetuates a stress response. Each new piece of news, which, yes, I know what you mean about that sort of more sensationalist kind of headline, trying to grab, kind of attention, but it's kind of like each time, your body is still responding exactly the same way as if a tiger just walked in the room. It's kind of like our brains don't really differentiate kind of like a threat from something we're reading, or that might happen one day, or that could happen, or that might have happened to somebody else, So we just got that information overload, and not enough offsetting of that with kind of more positive stuff necessarily. Yeah. So I don't know. What do you think?
I am 100% with you on that, and I agree. You're right. Like, the media and the way the government has to relay information. Like, I'm certainly not saying it's, I'm not against it, but I'm just observing how I feel when I hear the little Delta ring, the little jingle that goes with it. I immediately sort of, I almost feel like I get this adrenaline response.
Yes.
Like, what new information are they going to tell me?
Yes.
And then when it's nothing, I sort of go, and it almost feels like these little spikes across the course of a day, even though I know for the most part there's not going to be any new information. I still get that.
Yes.
It feels like it's wearing me down, actually.
That's so hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
You literally are producing adrenaline. Each time you do hear that noise, you've got that conditioned response now, and your hypothalamus literally will be releasing that process, adrenaline.
Karen, can you talk us through the stress response, and what is a normal stress response, but then also what situations like this, what impact that it might have been having on our stress response? So can you sort of talk us through that, because not everyone will be familiar with that?
Yeah. Well, so, we do have, humans have a stress response. So it's part of our nervous system. And the part specifically involved is an arm of the nervous system called the autonomic nervous system. So it's that sort of more automatic part, which branches out into two arms. So one side of that is the stress response. So as I said, if a tiger walked into the room, or when you hear, that news alert, your body gears up to anticipate kind of that threat and to respond and to survive. So, the stress system is there, it's adaptive, it's to help us cope and survive and respond to things in our life. And it's always been designed to be relatively short-lived, like sort of short and sharp, to get the job done, to help us to either put up a fight if we can, or to flight, to get away. And if neither of those options are there for us, then other things can happen. But we won't go so much into that. That's more kind of to do with imminent trauma, like assault and things like that. But in these sorts of situations, it's that more acute stress. And so if something happens and we have a stress response to it and it's not able to resolve, then we go into a kind of longer lasting stage. And so the body is responding using the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, so the HPA axis, which is where, we've got sort of the adrenaline being kicked off. That goes to the pituitary gland. Then we also next, if this threat isn't resolving along this way, then we will start to make cortisol in the adrenal glands. And so if you're having multiple ongoing stresses, or there's that feeling of ongoing stress that can't resolve, your body's basically kind of going into that like low-grade stress or fight and flight response. And the thing that's wrong with that, although that's also adaptive, we can do that for periods of time to kind of get through, so if, like in the past, from an ancestral perspective, like if there was like, say, a famine, or there was like kind of hardship going on, people would be able to kind of use up their reserves, keep going, get through, and then have a rest and recovery stage at some point. It's not ideal, but, we can do that. So, in modern society, that might be kind of, I guess right now, like in a pandemic, we're kind of under an endurance stage where we're rising to the challenge and having to kind of keep responding to like ongoing changes and threats in our environment that we can't control necessarily. But, in modern life, it could also be like working on a work deadline, getting through prolonged study, caring for a loved one who's sick for a long period of time. Or more often what I see in my practice is sort of a combination of lots of those things kind of all being juggled at the same time as not enough going into the opposite arm of the autonomic nervous system, which is the rest and digest side, or the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's where kind of our gut works well, our immune system, is kind of supported, our hormone system's all kind of working optimally, and our body can really heal from whatever stresses that we've been contending with, and digest our food and absorb our nutrients optimally, and recover and rebalance. So when that can't happen enough of the time, we tend to go into something called an allostatic load, which is the wear and tear and the damage that can be happening both psychologically as well as physically to our health, when we're under this sort of endurance type of stress.
Karen, are there people who are more predisposed to getting into that endurance phase and not having that adequate sort of rest and recovery and parasympathetic nervous system response, or is everyone sort of at the same risk of the detrimental effects of that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because, we do all have the same physiology. So no one's immune from this kind of, we all have a sympathetic nervous system that's going to respond and react when we feel under threat or in danger. But there are differences, and some of them will be, I guess sort of genetic differences to do with, how we metabolize and kind of cope when we're under stress with like some of those stress hormones and things like that. And then you've got your sort of early life experiences that can provide a set point for the nervous system. So generally, what we sort of know from psychology and things like the adverse childhood experiences studies would be that, if you've had really difficult early life relationships where you've had your nervous system has sort of become wired more towards threat or expecting threat, or not feeling supported, enough, that becomes a bit of a set point for, your later years as well. And if you've been through kind of adverse childhood experiences, which can be different traumas, which could be, abuse, neglect, those sorts of experiences that we think of. But it can also be things like, moving cities, or, someone in the family was sick, so those really adverse sort of things that take a toll, again, on that sort of nervous system and allostatic load. So, if you had a relatively kind of robust childhood with not too much kind of stress happening or trauma happening, and really good kind of family support and all of that, that sets you up really, really well to, I guess, have resilience and to have a nervous system that kind of thinks I can cope. And, when things happen, people are going to be there for me. That, of course, is all challenged for all of us under these conditions where, those usual lines of resources and support might not be accessible for the first time in our lives.
Yeah. It's so interesting what you're saying about the adverse child studies. And this is, I know for me, like there are just a couple of instances that I could immediately relay that I think set up sort of how I felt about myself and situations, which were almost comments that the adult making them would have just not even thought twice about, but had a real impact on me moving forward. And this wasn't my parents, these were just other adults in my life. And then, and I can see how, that childhood experience sort of sets you up. What about the epigenetic environment? So we know in nutrition, for example, that a lot of sort of health outcomes, or maybe not a lot, maybe that's overstating it. We're understanding the impact of what our mothers did and what their mothers did on our own health comes now. Is the same sort of seen in that stress literature?
Oh, definitely. So there's this really fascinating research. There's a book called, I think it's It Didn't Start With You. I think the author is Mark Williden. Yeah, you can, I'm pretty sure that's his name. Anyhow, this book, It Didn't Start With You, is all about inherited sort of epigenetic family trauma and how that impacts. But he talks about some mouse studies actually in this book where what they did was they got a mother and they get it sounds awful, but they kind of gave her a traumatic experience. Can't remember what it was, but something that put her under a fight or flight kind of response. But they paired it with the smell of cherry blossom, and so or cherry. So when she went on to have her pups, who had never been exposed to that smell, and they did give them a trial of what effect that smell would have on them, they all went into a fight or flight response. So that happened to her pups. But what they found that also happened for the pups of her pups, so her grandpups. When they were presented with the smell of cherry, they basically all went into a fight or flight response. And so I think that kind of study really highlights just how we can get conditioned. And I've seen that in clinical work that I do with adults. This is just anecdotal reports, but like people whose families went through, like grandparents went through the Holocaust, and just some of the ways that has showed up for the person in my room, where they've never been through some of those experiences, but the impact on their behaviour and what's happening for them, around things like maybe food or anxiety, certain like phobias that come up for them. I definitely think there's something about that sort of imprinting of what we need to be worried about, so preparing our offspring for certain dangers in the environment.
Are your clients aware of the link, or is it sort of in your work? Do you make it aware, or is it just something that you sort of have in your head that you're like, okay, so that makes sense to me? Like, how does that sort of work?
Yeah, usually a bit of both, so depending on the person or kind of, but definitely in my head, but certainly I like to help people become aware. And books like that one I mentioned, are a great resource for people to kind of go away and reflect and learn about that stuff and draw some of those dots, because then it's just sometimes having a narrative to make sense of why something's happening.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll pop that book in the show notes for people if they're interested to check out. So when people hear that a lot of how we respond now may well be how we have been wired to respond, does that mean that people can't do anything about it? So what sort of tactics can people sort of put into place if they feel like they're in that sort of boat?
That's the beauty of all of this, isn't it? Is that there's so much we can do when we're under even a sort of chronic stress experience, that we can do to offset that and to either prevent or cope and get through or recover from, some of the impacts of chronic stress. There's, you come at it from sort of psychology tools, you can come at it from nutrition and lifestyle, in order to support the nervous system. From the sort of more psychology side, the main things really are about helping, calm things back down. So what can happen when you get kind of, like when you've got those news stories kind of constantly reminding you that Delta's all around, you get really wired and sort of anticipating that next threat. So helping your body to kind of get safe again and to calm back down basically kind of tones up that nerve, the vagus nerve, to kind of stop you being so reactive. So you can kind of do things like that. If you can't change much in your environment, you can do some work around what you can do with your response to the environment to get more resilient. So some of that is, sort of breathing. There's different breathing techniques to help switch on parasympathetic mode. So having a longer out breath and spending some time each day just kind of resetting that, taking 5 or 10 minutes to just kind of step away from your day. Use it. I mean, there's so many apps now. Like I like the Smiling Mind app. There's Calm. There's Headspace. There's just so many helpful apps if you need sort of a bit of guidance on how to do a little bit of that sort of mindful breathing to switch off and step away from stress. I think because there is, one controllable factor is how much we kind of pay attention to all of those incoming threats, from devices. And things. So just allocating maybe some time each day where you will check in consciously with some news. Obviously, I guess we have to stay informed about what's happening with level changes and what we need to be doing. But, how often do we need to realistically do that? So, you can do some environmental kind of controls around the things you can change. Grounding is another really useful kind of safety kind of psychology tool, so just helping come back to the present moment, coming out of strong emotions or threat through using your senses. So a simple exercise is kind of to notice 5 things. So to just look around the room, stop for a moment, notice and name 5 things you can see, stop and listen, notice 5 things you can hear. Check in with your feet on the ground, notice what they feel like grounded on the earth. Even better to get outside, do it on the grass, get your bare feet, get in the ocean, feel the sand in the water. Notice other things you might be able to feel, like the wind on your skin, the fabric of your clothing. And when you bring on board those senses and you kind of shift your focus away from thoughts and sensations, happening in that stress response, it just brings you back to the present moment. It just kind of calms everything back down and gives your body a sense of being safe and here in this moment. Like right now, I'm okay, which we sometimes have to do over and over when you're going through chronic stresses and the scary stories in our mind about the future and what might be happening. Coming back to right now, like, are you okay in this moment? Yeah.
Those are such sort of simple tools, and I find it really interesting because when I speak to people around food, often stress comes up because food is either, a distraction or it's, stress impacts how someone eats and what they eat and that kind of thing. And I imagine, of course, in your role as a psychologist, you'll have a lot more buy-in to some of the things that you just talked about, which all sound super simple and very sort of immediate. People I talk to really struggle to buy into this idea that what they can do in that here and now can really change things. Like, do you get that kind of resistance at all? Or is it just because when people talk to me, I'm a nutritionist, so they just want to talk to me about food?
Yeah, look, I think that has its origins in this idea that we don't like to feel discomfort and that our goal is generally to move away from discomfort and to try and feel happy or calm or okay, and that makes sense. Like, I understand why we all do that. I'm a human too, and those are my preferred experiences as well. However, we also feel all of these other feels, like we get anxious, we feel like sad, we feel scared, we feel frustrated, shame and guilt, like all of these sorts of feelings come up. And so I think, sometimes it just comes back to that trying to get rid of how we feel. And so when people are like, oh, I tried some grounding, it didn't work for me, it's kind of like, well, what happened? And it might be like, oh, well, I was feeling, like sad, or I was feeling, I just was feeling frustrated because I wasn't feeling calm quickly, so it's that idea of like, well, these things might not necessarily change how you feel. They might not make you feel happy, and you might not feel calm immediately. They're still useful, and they're going to take you towards a direction that matters. And to use a term of our friend Lara Bryden, you've got to play the long game.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's not a quick fix. And if you've been under an endurance stage, as we have with, up and down with this pandemic for like months on end, it's not going to take a day of doing a bit of breathing, to kind of reset everything. It's going to take some time to support your stress response to heal and recover, and as you know in your job, like there's just so much you can do from a nutritional perspective to support this process to make it easier. And that's what I find in my work, is that when people, kind of cover some of those bases, make sure that you're looking after, what you're actually putting into your body, making sure that you're kind of getting the protein and healthy fats, particularly at the start of the day, making sure you're hydrating throughout the day, filling any gaps that might be there around kind of B vitamins, zinc, magnesium, a lot of those stress nutrients. Fatty acids are so important to your nervous system, as you know. Your whole nervous system and the myelin sheath is made from fats and lipid. Like that's what it is, and they're essential fats. We have to consume those, and so these are things that can help support, provide a foundation, which then all those psychology tools, can sometimes alongside that work better, because you're kind of doing both sides. You're supporting the gut, you're supporting what's going into the gut, you're helping your nervous system make sure that there's no gaps in what it needs, which are going to be higher during stress. As you and I have both just been looking at Julia Rutledge's book, The Better Brain, and she talks about a theory that I found really helpful to kind of think about, which was the triage theory of stress, and how when you're under an endurance stage, those nutrients are going to be diverted away, to those survival organs and muscles, so you might be missing out, your nervous system, your brain might be missing out because there's meant to be this short-term diversion of all those nutrients to help you fight or flight. But when that goes on for months on end, you're going to be depleting, and that then perpetuates the whole stress cycle because everything starts to become self-maintaining. The more stressed you are, the harder it is to kind of get out of stress.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because that's that's how you and I have become good friends and met, because we met through Ancestral Health Society, and how your ancestral sort of interest in how the brain operates and the use of nutrition and stuff to help support people in their stress response and in the work that you do. Yet that doesn't seem to me to be a very sort of prevalent message, maybe, when people think about clinical psychology. It's not often sort of the first thing that people go, oh, yeah, you really need to think about your food and nutrients. People are more often think, okay, well, what's the medication that I think I'm going to need to take to help sort of support me in the here and now, the quick fix. And I understand that. And it's, if I think about just sort of the standard stuff people would go to when they're stressed, it's things like coffee and alcohol and sugar and from a nutrition perspective, all the things which may exacerbate the stress response, but that immediate pleasure of having them sort of overrides any other thought of what the long-term negative impact could have.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And then it just erodes things further, right?
Completely. Karen, with your work then, so you're obviously very interested in people supporting sort of all pathways, like with their diet as well as the psychological tools that you use. How open are your clients to sort of making dietary change to help support their nervous system? Like, is that a conversation that they're willing to have? Is that something that you introduce later on down the line? What's that look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, so my business is called Integrative Practice, and it got set up in 2016. So 6 years almost on, what I've found is that people increasingly have become interested.
Mm-hmm.
So when I first started, I was doing, a lot more sort of general psychology. People might not have been that interested. And so I was sort of doing a bit of both. Whereas now my whole work is just working in this way, using both sides. But what trend I've noticed is that people now ask for that. They're looking for that. They're trying to find a service that would provide that. And so that's really, I think that's showing that there is some shift. And I think a lot of the work that has been coming out of, the University of Canterbury with Julia Rutledge's research is becoming more known. Her book is helping to get word out. Felice Jacker over in Deakin University in Melbourne. A lot of her work around the Mediterranean diet for depression and doing RCT, outcomes which have been replicated, finding that, it can be used as a standalone treatment and be effective, for depression. I think people are becoming more interested, and probably the pandemic has made us all a lot more interested in wellness, because there's been this concern about health, this virus has made everyone aware that they really value health, and they're worried about health, and they don't want to get sick or die, know. So maybe that's a silver lining in all of this. I don't know, I guess time will tell if there is a silver lining, but so I definitely find that probably because of the nature of my business, people are really open to it, because probably they're kind of already aligned and in fact, I look for that when I take on clients. I kind of check that they're going to be a suitable match for the type of approach that I offer, because it's not for everyone. And I think if it's not for you, then that's absolutely fine. If a preferred approach is something like medication or just purely therapy focused, that's absolutely fine. There are lots of services for lots of different people. This just happens to be the one that I provide. And I think there's definitely a lot of interest. I mean, I've had to close my books, a lot of the time, just because it's so it's so busy. But most psychologists at the moment, as you know, there's a shortage and the demand for services is really high. And I think that reflects how much that sort of heightened stress response and uncertainty has sort of made people realise that they need some tools or support around that.
It's interesting at work, we talk about the pandemic and other things that have gone on with work stuff, and it's really easy to normalize what's going on because everyone is in the same situation, and you can always think of someone who is in a worse situation than you. So I feel like people who are used to coping with a lot of things on their plate sometimes don't give enough headspace or importance to how they're feeling about the pandemic, or they almost brush it off that it's not an important thing that they're feeling because there are people so worse off, and you almost feel guilty for feeling a bit hard done by or for having these sort of depressive moments and stuff like that. It's so interesting how people respond.
Yeah, I think, perhaps, I don't know, but in New Zealand, I wonder, because we've kind of been almost like the golden child of, this pandemic, haven't we? We've been sort of put on a pedestal of, look how New Zealand's doing, and it is amazing, I really took for granted those months in between last lockdown and this lockdown, and life is basically normal, whatever normal is now. Still not been able to do lots of things, like visit family overseas, but, just going about your business. So there's a thing called survivor's guilt out of the trauma literature, which is kind of like when other people are worse off or have been through or, went through an event, maybe they died or they got really badly injured or other things happened and you survived, that there's a sort of survivor's guilt of I don't deserve, why did that happen to them and why wasn't it me? Or why, I can't complain about like the impact that this little bit's had on me because it's not as bad. And so I do wonder if there's some of that happening, kind of like, you know, we don't deserve to feel, you know, and I understand that, you know, I think, I can't imagine what it's like overseas in various countries around the world, not just with this, but with other things happening like Afghanistan. I can't think about it. It's overwhelming. So
the tactics that you mentioned before about grounding and about being present and using those apps, would they be helpful tactics for people who might be experiencing some of what we've just talked about with survivor's guilt, to sort of put into place daily to help them sort of cope and understand more how they're feeling? Or are there other things people can do? Do you know?
Well, I think, you know, though our mind is always trying to help us. So, you know, so when it's like there's just thoughts that come through and some of them are useful and some of them aren't. And so it's thinking, like, is it helpful to engage with those thoughts? Like, does it, like, what can I do with that right now? You know, and like, it doesn't mean that, you know, you're a bad person because other people might be in a different boat that might be perceived and might realistically be tangibly much worse. It doesn't negate the fact that you feel how you feel. You know, feelings are just feelings, and if you feel flat, low, if you're languishing, you know, like that makes sense, you know. And that's okay, even though, you know, you're comparing against, like, it's a comparison process, and it doesn't change the fact that you feel that way and that these thoughts are there. So a little bit of that sort of acceptance, you know, like being able to kind of make space for that without judging it. Like, I'm not a bad person just because I feel this way, and I shouldn't. Like, there's this sort of rules, like I shouldn't feel this way because I don't deserve to, or it's not bad enough, or I should be grateful. You know, it's like, should you? Like, these are just thoughts and feelings. You know, like, it's just your body and your brain and your emotional system kind of responding. And actually, the more you make space for that and don't struggle against it, the more likely those feelings are just going to pass through.
Nice.
And do their job, which is just to tell you that you're feeling, you know, that you're missing stuff. Or that you need to find a new way to seek reward right now, which doesn't have to be alcohol and sugar. Like, it could be, you know, like reading an amazing book, you know, or starting a book, or, you know, all sorts of things. Going for a walk.
I really love that. And it's that validation of feelings, right? It's actually these feelings I'm having are valid. It doesn't matter that I've still got my job and that I, you know, have a home, you know, that I can go to, or that I'm, you know, stuck in, and all the rest of it. It's well, you know, you could have the nicest place and it could still feel like a prison, right? But, so Karen, I'll tell you a story. I had a client who I worked with, and she had an autoimmune condition, and we sort of went through her diet, and she would be getting regular body work, like massage work, because she was also quite active. And one of the things which I see time and again with people is their completely low protein diet. Like, it's whenever it feels like I'm on broken record, or gosh, people must be getting sick of me talking about this, but it's so prevalent. I just, you know, I can't help but just continue to remind people. And so with her, she was following a sort of an unintended vegetarian approach, because for whatever reason, meat just always feels too hard to cook anyway. So I encouraged her to bump up her protein intake, bump up her red meat intake. And that was one of the major focus for her sort of in the 3 weeks between our appointments. We came back on for our follow-up appointment, and she said two things to me. One, she was like, my massage therapist couldn't believe the change in my tissue with the change in my diet. So, because obviously with diet, whenever you increase something else usually gives, you know, and for her, it was getting rid of a lot of the processed kind of carbohydrate type foods. And she said something interesting. She said that the massage therapist felt her body was less anxious. And she said to me that up until changing her diet, she just thought she was an anxious person. And she realized actually she wasn't, and it was driven by her diet. How much of that do you see in your clinic?
Well, I mean, that's a great story to highlight, how powerful the role of nutrition and, mental health experiences can be. I got to agree with you on the protein thing. One of the massive kind of food mistakes that people are accidentally making with, that I pick up on a lot of the time, I wouldn't say all the time, but a lot of the time would be insufficient protein, particularly at the top end of the day. But yeah, I mean, you think about all the ways in which that dietary intervention would have changed what's happening in her body around stress and anxiety, by stabilizing blood sugar throughout the day. Her ranges wouldn't have been sort of as chaotic and up and down, providing amino acids to the brain, to support making neurotransmitters that are involved in feeling calm and happy and okay. Like so many ways, that would have worked. Yeah.
Protein is such a good vehicle for those micronutrients as well, right? Iron,
Absolutely.
zinc, magnesium, the B vitamins that you were talking about. And, you and I are both very aligned. And so, of course, we have our bias. We both feel that including animal protein in the diet is optimal for mental health, for physical health. Yet this goes against this plant-based narrative that sort of is coming in from everywhere on social media, from government guidelines, from other health professionals and doctors and things like that. Do you find it a difficult thing to navigate in your practice?
Yeah, I mean, I do see, I once did a tally of, this is a while ago, so I don't know what it would be like now, but I did a tally of my clients to see what was the rate of sort of veganism and vegetarianism. And I think it was 30% that I was saying, which we know, I can't remember what the exact rates. Do you know what the current rates, population rates would be? Is it about 10%, something like that, of people that are consuming vegan or vegetarian diet? But what I found was that they were often coming to see me about 6 or 12 months post the dietary change. And this was most common, I was seeing in females. I rarely see it in males. However, and I think a lot of my clients report different reasons. Some people talk about not liking the taste of meat or feeling like it sits funny in their stomach, which I suspect just reflects digestive, kind of issues there with microbiome and digestion and other things. Not necessarily that they shouldn't eat meat, but that, something's not kind of going too well within the gut and digestive tract. Not liking the taste. Occasionally it can be tied into kind of trauma experiences, being concerned about cruelty to animals, which make, when worrying about that, feeling a lot of empathy, people that feel a lot of empathy and they worry a lot. Sometimes, there's guilt and kind of those sorts of feelings around it. Obviously, all the climate change kind of concerns and issues about, for some, kind of, farming practices. So there's always so many reasons, and I'm always sensitive to kind of understand why somebody is doing that. Sometimes people just think it's better for their health. They might have read something and decided that's probably better. So I find out the reason, I kind of have a discussion around that. I don't see it as my role to convert anyone, in terms of that they should, reconsider their diet. However, that said, I also kind of talk about how important all the nutrients are, and that by taking that out, they're missing the most nutrient-dense kind of practical way to get all of those nutrients in, and that it's actually not easy to replicate that without that food source.
Yeah.
It's probably not impossible for a vegetarian diet, and I'm sure there's a lot of people coping well, and I don't see them on vegetarian diets. Vegan diet, I find, for example, like B12, as you can't source that in non-animal products. And often, so what's happening is people are not aware of those dietary gaps, and they're not actually supplementing to try and at least kind of get those needs met. So, iron, B vitamin, zinc, which is super important for stress. I think your question was around what happens sort of with clients that have made that dietary change, and kind of how easy it is to walk people through those ideas. So yeah, I have a lot of acceptance, like I said, for if people choose not to make a change there, I just make sure that they know that they need to really go and probably work with someone on boosting all of those things up. And sometimes people decide that they're going to re-include animal products, and sometimes there's certain ones that they're more comfortable with, like eggs, free-range eggs, or organ meats sometimes, which, as you know, are often wasted. So they can be a really nutritious source. It's kind of a, from an environmental perspective, using up, nose to tail kind of consumption.
Mussels would be another one, right? Apparently mussels don't have a nervous system. And look at your face, you're like, oh, not sure about that.
Yeah,
but
disclaimer, I can't eat any seafood.
I love mussels.
I wish I could, though. It all tastes terrible to me for some reason.
Yeah, no, look, fair. Yeah. You probably might need to do some work with that, or in the psychology on that, Karen. No, I'm with you. Like I certainly would never would never try to convert someone from their dietary preference, yet would talk to them about the potential pitfall, or I wouldn't frame it like that. I would just say, we just really need to make sure we're dialing in these nutrients that you really need. And I feel, and I also, if they're open to it, I encourage them to sort of seek out other information on some of the other things which they may have heard, which might not be accurate with regards to the environment, or whether or not it's good or bad for your health, and that kind of thing, of which of course I'm very confident to talk them through the health story around nutrition. But a very well formulated vegan diet is really expensive, because you have to allow for the supplemental sources of protein and nutrients and things like that. But that is definitely more of a I suppose a privileged position to be in, to be able to do that.
Do you find with your clients that when people are eating kind of more plant, a vegan kind of diet, that they tend to include a lot more of processed kind of protein sources, like, which I know is kind of a new thing, out there in the food options?
Yeah, I do. And they rely, so a lot of the people I see would be insufficient protein, as we discussed, insufficient calories at the start of the day, particularly in light of a lot of the fasting practices that are going on. And, both you and I see the value in appropriately using fasting as a tool in some circumstances. But where I see it time and again is that under eating, insufficient protein and fat at the start of the day. And unfortunately, at the end of the day, there is just this insatiable appetite to continue to eat, plus a lot of digestive issues because the types of foods that are legumes and a lot of fiber and stuff. It's a real challenge for some people. And then, of course, with those more processed plant-based products, I do believe there are a couple out there which aren't nearly as bad as others, but from the sort of the processing perspective, the ingredients added, the potential environmental cost of producing these things, the very high price point, which actually means it's just not a viable option for a lot of people. I steer them away from them for the most part. Upon saying that, though, of course, there'll be people that eat them, or we have some of that stuff at our house as well, because sometimes you can't control everything and everything that goes into anyone's mouth, right?
Yeah. I suspect the reason that I see quite a number of people that are excluding animal products from their diet, I think one is because I'm in Wellington, which is just sort of like this interesting city where people are quite diverse, and they like to, there's lots of environmentally kind of minded people here, and all of that. So I think that's one aspect. But I think the reason I see them in my practice is often, where there are those sort of like epigenetic kind of issues with some of those particular nutrients around, methylation and things with sort of like B vitamins. And so when they take it out, those gaps really become accentuated for them, which might differ from someone that didn't have those sort of personal, epigenetic kind of issues.
Yeah. Yes. So interesting, eh?
Yeah. And that's why I think there's probably lots of people out there that are doing these diets, and they're not coming in with mental health problems. So I think it's an interesting area. It'd be great to see a bit more research coming out around some of the, I guess, what sort of things people are actually experiencing and in terms of mental health.
Yeah, completely. And then with regards to sort of nutrients and mental health, there's a lot of talk around the importance of some of these nutrients, yet when you see the sources of those nutrients being sort of promoted, they are the more vegetarian sources of these nutrients. Like an omega-3s is such a good example of this, where you see plant-based omegas and, take this to help support your omega-3, eat chia seeds and walnuts and flaxseed. But the conversion rate to those longer chain fatty acids, which we need, is like 2% maximum, so there's you cannot get your omega-3s from plants the way that you're promoted and the way that some supplement companies would suggest that you can. Algae, of course, being the exception.
I was going to ask about algae.
It's not as widely sort of available, but there's just a lot of misinformation around diet and mental health, and I feel like red meat and protein-based sources sort of get lumped into junk food a lot of the time, and we know that a junk food diet isn't good for the brain. So therefore the recommendations are, and they're great, fruits and vegetables contain super important, amazing phytochemicals and nutrients, but they shouldn't be the backbone of the, a dietary approach to support mental health, in my opinion anyway.
And coming back to the nervous system being made of fat, like the myelin sheath it's fats and lipids, and it needs those. So we do need to sustain that. I listened to a talk Lara Bryden gave this week on perimenopause, which is a super interesting area that I see women all the time kind of coming in that sort of, 12-year kind of approximate window leading into menopause. But in her talk, she was talking about that in the absence of fats, that the myelin sheath can potentially, your body will literally cannibalize the myelin in order to get its fat needs. So because through perimenopause, your brain's recalibrating from sort of glucose for energy towards kind of fats for energy. As this is your area more than mine. I'm just sort of regurgitating some learning from this talk. But I found that I need to go away and kind of think about that idea a lot more in terms of other critical windows over the lifespan in the nervous system. Are there other times where that process potentially happens? Because that really, I never looked at it like that. I don't know if you've heard of that before.
Yeah, I have, and I wonder how much of that relates to the increased prevalence of dementia and Alzheimer's in women as we age compared to men. And I remember listening to a podcast where that was, one of the things that they were talking about was, the prevalence rates. And so I'm familiar with it. Yeah, you're right. Super interesting.
Yeah, well, and because, Lara's work has kind of highlighted how, dementia, other neurological things like, migraines are happening, Parkinson's, so the risk for those sorts of things happening for women over that window when, if they're not kind of looking after their nervous system well.
Yeah. And also women, they juggle so much. And it's not that men don't juggle stuff, but we probably know a lot of women who, and, you're probably someone yourself, mothers particularly put themselves last. And I see this a lot with my clients and things like that, is that they look after everyone else and don't think about how to look after themselves. So there are a number of things that sort of need to happen in order for them to make those moves. And one of them is to really dial in that idea that if you don't look after yourself, then how are you going to then be of service to others, maybe, if that's someone's sort of motivating thing? Because
own oxygen mask.
Own oxygen mask, exactly, Karen. So are your books open now?
My mini course?
Yes.
Kind of
yes, talk to
will
me.
Be next week, yes. Yeah, so, very excited to have them almost ready, and by next week they will be up and available to people So
can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for a little while I've been wanting to move into putting together sort of an online program, because so much of what I do, I just feel like there's quite broad kind of ideas, and it gets really hard when all you've got is like one-on-one sort of capacity, and that's all you can do. So I had this idea to put it into a program, probably for about 3 years. That's how long it's taken. The pandemic sort of like sped me along with getting my act together. But yeah, so currently have the sort of like a free little mini course that's kind of the first part of all of that.
Awesome.
And the actual main program will be coming in the early start of next year. So still working on that. But this little course is called Reset and Refuel from Chronic Stress, Anxiety and Fatigue.
Awesome.
And it's just 3 little parts. So it's just talking people through that stress response and endurance stage of stress, and also an exhaustion stage, which we didn't talk as much about today, but it's that sort of enforced rest and recovery that the body will go into where you haven't been able to stop after an endurance stage of stress. It just briefly differentiates traumatic stress and talks a little bit about stress in your close relationships. And then the part 2 is really focused more on the reset and refuel component. So a bit of what we talked about today with some of those top-down or mind strategies like breathing and grounding, and examples of how to kind of do that, and just some very basic nutritional ideas to support stress. I mean, it's in a small thing like this, it can't go in depth, but those very broad sort of overarching ideas. And then there's just a little workbook, so people can kind of put it all together and personalise for themselves if they want to. So yeah, I'm really excited to have it almost ready to go.
Karen, that's amazing, because what I know is that there are very few people in your field that have your approach, and I'm not suggesting that other approaches aren't appropriate and also very successful, but I just love how you focus on the holistic side of things with bringing in nutrients, bringing in nutrition, along with those psychological kind of tools, because it feels like it's very complete, and I know that people get a lot of value of that. But there are only so many Karens in the world. So the fact that you're bringing it online and making it so much more available, I think, is amazing. So,
thanks, Mikki.
So by the time this comes out, your course would have been up for a couple of weeks. Where can people find it?
So it's going to sit on my website at this stage. So my website is integrativepractice.com, and there'll be a sign-up kind of button quite evident on that page. It'll probably also be over on my Facebook and probably on my Instagram, which are at Integrative Practice, I believe. Wherever you look on any of those, you should be able to find it.
That is awesome, and we will link to the show notes as well. Karen, thank you for your time this morning. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, it's been so nice to come on and have a chat, and I've really enjoyed listening to your podcast and watching you grow it over time, and it's just, I'm so thrilled for you. And I've learned so much. So
that is awesome, and I cannot wait to come down to windy Wellington again and hang out. It'll be fun.
Yeah, or Waiheke Island, maybe.
Oh yeah, that'll be good too.
Yeah.
Awesome, Karen.
Right.
See you later. Bye.
Yeah. See you, Mikki. Bye.
All right, team, hope you enjoyed that. As I said at the beginning of the show, Karen is one of my best mates, and she is such a wealth of information, and I feel really privileged to know her, and she's such a warm, caring, lovely, lovely person. And I know that her empathy and her compassion will come through when you check out her website and sign up for her Project Revive course. Now, next week on the podcast, I am interviewing one of the most inspirational runners that I follow on Instagram, and anyone who's in the ultra running space will be familiar with Williden. So we have a great chat next week. And until then though, you can catch me over on Twitter at Mikki Williden. That's also the handle on my Instagram account. Over on Facebook at Mikki Williden Nutrition, or on my website, Williden.com, where you can sign up to get my free weekly email on all the research things that I'm interested in right now. You can sign up to one of my meal plans, be it fat loss, keto longevity plan, or just a good old real food nutrition plan under the title Be Awesome, for some good balanced gluten-free meal options. Or sign up to my recipe portal, which is actually an awesome way to support the podcast as well. So $12 a month, you get access to my recipe library, which is updated weekly, my weekly email, you get access to my real food nutrition group on Facebook, and the opportunity for me to have some input into your nutrition via our online platform messaging system. So you can just really pick my brain on all things nutrition. You know I love that stuff. Hopefully you do too. And in addition to the recipe portal as a way to support the podcast, of course, for you to like the podcast on your favorite podcast platform, subscribe if you can, leave a review, that would also be amazing. Hey team, really good to connect with you today, and I hope that wherever in the world you are, your week is going well, and I really appreciate you tuning in. So you have a great week, and we will catch up next week with my conversation with Mike Wardian. Bye for now.